May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Hello, I hope you're there. One of the most moving things about this last week is how many people all over the world share in it. From Alaska to Zanzibar, Vietnam to Brazil, hundreds of millions of people gather in churches or in the street to celebrate the Lord's entry into Jerusalem, his last meal with his disciples, his passion and resurrection. They come together with one mind to remember and to celebrate. They do it each in their own way, of course, from the tall pointed hats of Spanish penitents to the unfortunate men who nail themselves to crosses in the Philippines, Lutherans who turn up in their best clothes to listen to a Bach cantata and a 60-minute sermon, or people not so far from home who bake hot cross buns and simnel cake and turn up on Easter Day in their Easter bonnets. All this wonderful diversity goes to show their common mind and their devotion to their faith. This year, of course, things are looking very different. Our church at St Mary's will not have been closed on a Sunday since the year 1208, and you can Google for yourselves the grievance that the Pope had against King John at that time. We're trying to compensate for this by using the internet, but I don't see that ever taking over as the usual way of doing church. It's the same all over the world. And it's worth noting what unites us all in this. We can leave talk of uncertainty, grief, and anxiety for another time. What is so clear is the shared conviction that human life must be preserved. We must work together scrupulously to defend the health of the nation. The well-being of our neighbours is the concern of everyone. We've seen this locally in the enthusiasm and the work of the group of volunteers that John Braithwaite and Debbie Whiteley recruited and organised. It's beyond praise. This idea that the well-being of the individual is the concern of us all, it's a remarkable principle, and certainly one that was unknown in the ancient world. If we all emerge from this unscathed, as I trust we will, it will be because people have stayed home, done their bit to stop the spread, and looked after their neighbours. Our readings in church over the past few weeks have had a bearing on all this. Ezekiel's dry bones, Jeremiah's concern for the lost tribes of Israel this morning. These were all to do with bringing new life to a defeated and demoralized nation. The story of the raising of Lazarus shows the value that Jesus placed on the life of an individual. And the resurrection of Jesus himself is a demonstration of the power of God's love for his creation that continues beyond death. God's love for his creation, I said. We've just heard John's story of the resurrection, how Jesus met Mary Magdalene in the garden and she mistook him for the man who pricks out the lobelias and sweeps up the cherry blossom. For John, this was an absolute new beginning. This was a new creation. Creation had been reset. The clock had been set to zero. Of course, the resurrection had to happen in a garden. Adam and Eve had been set there, and that's where they'd made humanity's first mistake, expelled from paradise, condemned to live in a fallen world. Well, let's not be too gloomy about this. Fallen it may be, but God looked at it at the beginning and declared it good. And he loved it, we're told, which after all is why he sent his Son. So the world is lovable, and we are in it, and we are lovable too. So yes, there's hope. But as you know, the promise goes on that one day the ever-circling years will bring back the age of gold, and paradise will once again be open to us. The dream of returning to paradise, the ultimate place of safety, that's never left God's people. One day we might be allowed back. As we've seen, the resurrection happens in a garden, And the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, shows us the garden restored. John's vision of the New Jerusalem has the tree of life and the river that runs through it. It's the Garden of Eden brought into his own century, with a population, yes, of city dwellers, but still the old hope of beauty, rest, and freedom from care. It was a hope that the Jews still cherished. Many of them do to this day. The Garden of Eden, so goes their mythology, the Garden of Eden is well hidden. It's closed in on every side and guarded so that none can see it, neither angels or the eye of a prophet or seer. Just as a nut is enclosed within a shell, so Eden is a world within. Eden is a world within. What a beautiful hope we can share with them. Alexander the Great, on his travels in Asia, we're told, found a river with waters so fragrant that he decided to trace its source. He followed the stream till he reached the gates of paradise. "Open the gates," said King Alexander to the angel guarding the entrance. "This is the gate of the Lord," said the angel. "Only the righteous shall enter into it." Be that as it may, we have to ask whether this garden, whether this paradise is real. Well, a garden is real enough, but of course it can also be an image, a symbol, and it can represent a reality. Eden in the myth was a garden of exquisite delight, where order had been made out of chaos, where humans lived in tranquility, and where God walked with his children in the cool of the day. Unlike Alexander the Great in the legend, we will never find this paradise by searching. It's within us, it's in our depths, it's the very ground of our being. And is what is inside us real? The answer to that can only be, what on earth could be more real? This tranquility, this rest, this brightness that's deep down inside us, it's there for us to inhabit now. And this kind of talk, I know, can make people feel uncomfortable. We Brits are practical people. We gave up all this interior stuff at the Reformation. Spirituality is a bit hippie, a bit new age. Well, it's gone on. It has gone on, even though it's not much talked about, perhaps. And surely we all admit that human beings are physical, emotional, and intellectual beings, but also are spiritual beings. Mind and body, we know how to feed the mind and body, how to measure our progress. Whole industries are set up to enable that. The newspapers are full of it. We can use machines to weigh our bodies and test our physical power. We can pit our minds against the daily Sudoku to check we're still smart. And I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister's doing that from his hospital bed. But what about our spiritual life? This garden within that God planned to dwell in, what if it turned out to be just a patch of nettles? God stood there and called and surveyed the bleak scene, but there was no reply. So he gave it up as a bad job and moved on. Our existence as spiritual beings, this life deep inside, this is what our hope of resurrection depends on. Flesh and blood, we're told, cannot inherit the kingdom. So we need to cherish our immortal soul. If we've neglected it, if it's withered away, if our spiritual being is a poor, wheezing little thing that when the time comes for it to matter, no one will notice it's even there, what hope is there for us? Well, for most of you, I suspect Everything in the garden is lovely. You tend the paradise within you with care and love. You just need to go on as you are. But what about those who know that deep down it's weeds, thickets, brambles? Don't despair. My yoke is easy, my burden is light, said Jesus. It's like the wilderness in Judea when the harsh winter comes to an end. The sun comes out, the rain begins, and suddenly the hillside is covered with the most beautiful flowers. I'll speak more about this in weeks to come, so I'll finish with this. Value your immortal soul. Open the gates to it, let in the breeze and the rain. Feel the warmth and the light of the sun reaching to the darkest corner. Nourish it. Come alive from inside. Use these weeks of isolation, if you like, to sit in the open and feel yourself blossoming inside, just like the flowers and trees you can see in your garden. That is the necessary first step of resurrection. Nothing else in life can bring such joy. May that joy be yours this Eastertide and forever and ever. Amen.